Did you know we have a thriving global community of like-minded ancestral home cooks and homesteaders? Every day on our Discord forum, we are discussing what we're cooking, what we're growing, what we're thinking about, what our latest struggles are, and supporting each other to fully embrace this beautiful lifestyle. As a patron member, you can also choose to access an extra private podcast feed, which includes monthly intimate chats where Andrea and I talk in depth about what's happening in our lives and kitchens. There are over 90 recordings waiting for you there right now. In addition, we've got a massive collection of inspiring and helpful downloads for you, including many recipes and videos. And once a month, you'll get to visit with myself, Andrea, and the community as we come together live and in person. Visit ancestralkitchenpodcast.com for all the details on how to join us. Come be part of our world and change yours.
Y'all have been such great podcast supporters, and you're such great customers of our sponsor, oneearthhealth.com, and they are running a giveaway for our U.S. listeners. It runs from April 1st to May 13th, and you'll win a 3-month, that's 3 bottles, supply of liver capsules. To enter, you'll sign up to our mailing list at ancestralkitchenpodcast.com and sign up for the One Earth Health mailing list at oneearthhealth.com. All of these links are in the show notes.
Combining gluten-free eating with ancestral eating need not be daunting. Today, I talk with Rebecca Zipp, a beloved podcast guest and supporter. She's been gluten-free for the last 16 years, bringing her husband and her children along with her. In addition, for most of the last year, I ate gluten-free. Between the two of us, we've got a lot to talk about. In this episode, we cover why Rebecca went gluten-free and the impact it's had on her, examples of gluten-free breakfasts, lunches and dinners, the massive gluten-free carbohydrate options and how we use them, the basics of gluten-free bread making, and Rebecca finishes the episode giving words of wisdom from her 16 years of gluten-free eating. And remember, gluten doesn't necessarily have to be an all or nothing. Making one of your meals a day gluten-free or several days a week gluten-free or going gluten-free for a short space of time can make a big difference to our health journeys and digestion. So even if you don't have to avoid gluten all the time, the things we talk about in this episode will help lighten, change up, and inspire your kitchen.
Welcome to the Ancestral Kitchen Podcast.
I'm Alison, a European town dweller living in England.
And I'm Andrea, living on a family farm in Northwest Washington State, USA.
Pull up a chair at the table and join us as we talk about eating, cooking, and living with ancestral food wisdom in a modern world kitchen. Hello and welcome back to Ancestral Kitchen Podcast. For this episode, I am delighted to welcome back to the podcast because she's been on with us before, Rebecca from ahumbleplace.com. Thank you for coming on, Rebecca.
Thank you for having me again. I'm so honored to be here again.
Wonderful. So Rebecca was on our meal planning episode, which was number 83. We're going to talk a little bit about meal planning this episode, but that episode 83 dives much more deeply into it. Rebecca is an absolute whiz with meal planning, so do go back and listen to that if you haven't yet. Rebecca is also a Patreon of the podcast and has her own site, humbleplace.com, where she talks about homeschooling in the Charlotte Mason style, which if you've listened to us for a while, you will know that particularly Andrea talks about a lot. So, what's the last thing you ate, Rebecca? Tell me about that.
Okay, well, I love this part of your show because it's just always so interesting to see what you guys eat. It gives me inspiration. I just had breakfast a little bit ago. It's morning here. And my husband made a big batch of pancakes this weekend. We soak the oats overnight. And then he makes them in a blender and cooks them that way. And we had leftovers because my son and I were gone on a retreat this weekend. And so we had some of those left over with butter and maple syrup. And then we also had some...
So were the pancakes cooked and
Yes.
leftover, or was the mix leftover?
No, the pancakes were cooked, so I just reheated them in the toaster oven.
Easy. Okay.
Yeah, very, very simple. And then we had scrambled eggs in bacon grease, leftover bacon grease, and then some homemade kefir. Mm-hmm. And now I'm drinking some, I've been working on some liver detoxing, so I'm drinking some dandelion root tea.
Okay, so I've had dandelion coffee. Mm-hmm. What's the difference? So just the way they prepare it, whether it's a coffee or a tea, I guess, is it?
I'm not sure. Usually I have just a straight up dried dandelion root tea, but I get it from Azure, but they've been out. So I got some roasted dandelion root, and that tastes more like coffee. So I'm wondering if that's the difference.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think they roast the root, and maybe for the coffee version, they roast it quite dark, like coffee would be, whereas the tea's not roasted. I wanted to go back and talk about the pancakes for a moment. You said oats were in them. What else?
It's oats, banana. I actually can share the recipe with you if you'd like. The only modification I've made is I got it from a website. I can't remember the name of it, but the only modification I've made is, again, that we soak the oats overnight in water with a little bit of kefir. But it's maple syrup, banana. My daughter can't have egg whites, so we just put egg yolks in it. Cinnamon, maple syrup, a few other things. Like I said, my husband makes it, so I'm not 100% sure what's in it, but it's very simple ingredients.
Nice. Does it hold together all right without the egg white?
Yeah, very well.
Yeah.
Surprisingly. We've had to experiment quite a bit with that just because of her egg white allergy. And for the most part, we find that most things do well. I mean, they sometimes are a little bit more dense than they would be otherwise, but they still taste good.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's a recipe in our cookbook for Staffordshire oatcakes, and those are a pancake, sound quite similar to, what you've had this morning, but those are just oats, water, and a bit of salt. There's no need for an egg in there to bind it. With oats, you can do that quite easily. They're not perhaps as elastic as other pancakes might be, a little bit more brittle, but they're still nice pancakes and good. You just don't need the egg at all.
Right. These are pretty thin. They're not like, the nice big fluffy pancakes that you would normally see, but it works well for us.
Yeah. I think that's the kind of difference between American pancakes, which when we think of that, and probably maybe just in America, that's what you think of as pancakes. They're big and fluffy. Whereas in Europe, a kind of a crepe style, like a French crepe, or the pancakes we're a bit more used to over here aren't big and fluffy like American pancakes. We're used to them being a bit thinner as well.
Yeah, I would say that they're more crepe-like than, I think the traditional idea here is that we have like lumberjack pancakes with a stack of 15 that's like a foot high or whatever. They're not like that. So they're very European, I guess.
Yeah. When we came back to England in the summer, Rob and I went to a restaurant near Borough Market, which is a famous foodie market in London. And we had breakfast and Rob had pancakes and it was like that. It wasn't 15 foot high, but it was very high, this stack. And he couldn't get through it all. There were too many of them.
They're very filling.
They were like that thing. Yeah, cool. Okay.
And what about you? What did you have?
Yeah, so we had lunch because it's later in the afternoon for me here, just like when I'm recording with Andrea. We had sausages from the market. The farmer at the market does amazing sausages with no breadcrumbs in them, just meat, salt and pepper. And we had them with cabbage, which I made sauerkraut this morning, but the cabbage was a bit too big, so I saved a quarter. It's a huge cabbage. And chopped it in the same way, but then put that in the cast iron pan with the sausages. And Gabriel turned the sausages over. And then I noticed at the end, the cabbage had shrunk down so much, just in the 30 minutes it had been in the pan, that there wasn't so many vegetables. So I cheated and stole some frozen peas from the freezer.
Oh, okay. I don't think that's cheating.
As well. It was actually nice. The pea with the cabbage and the sausage went really well. We had that with a bread that Rob made when I was away this weekend, which is quite a impressive thing. He's slowly learning to make different sourdough breads himself without me around.
Okay.
And it was about 75% rye and 25% this new wheat, which I've been talking about and trying, which is a heritage wheat grain, which is a byproduct from the thatch. And Rob, although he can't eat standard wheat, seems to be okay so far with this wheat.
Okay. Is that what you were talking about in your recent newsletter?
Yeah, in my newsletter. Yeah, it's that exact grain. And we tried it, and I thought Rob wasn't going to be okay with it. I thought this isn't going to work. But so far, he's been okay. We've only done 25% in recipes so far.
Okay.
I want this weekend to make a pizza with 100%.
Okay.
Of it, so
that sounds good.
Pizza. So we'll see how he is with that.
Okay.
But it's really tasty, and it comes from such an amazing farm that I'd be really happy if he can eat it. Just to support them is a good thing.
Right, that would check all the boxes, that you would be supporting someone locally and you know them, and that he can tolerate it.
Yeah, exactly. So fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Okay, let's dive into today's topic. We're going to be talking about eating ancestrally gluten-free today. And I just wanted to, before we dive into you, because you've been eating gluten-free for a long, long time, which is why I wanted you on here. I wanted to talk about why, because I think, when you see the terms gluten-free, a lot of us think, oh, well, I'm not gluten-free. That's kind of not relevant to me. I can eat gluten. But I think that there are lots of reasons why people might want to eat gluten-free. So it might be, first of all, that, you're celiac, or you have a serious health issue that you're working through and you want to cut gluten out of the equation, full stop. It might be because you're experimenting with your health. You think maybe you have some intolerances, you're not quite sure, you're not sure what gluten does for you, and you just want to play around a bit and see what happens if you take gluten out. It might also be because you just want a break. And, that might be for a day, a week, because you feel like you're kind of been a bit heavy. But it might also be just for one meal in a day. I feel like eating gluten grains 3 meals a day can be quite heavy. And so taking 1 or 2 meals a day and saying, you know what, I'm not going to eat gluten at these meals. I'm just going to eat gluten for my lunch, for example, can feel really good because it's lighter on your digestion. And as a way to kind of maintain eating grains without feeling too heavy, I think it's a really positive thing. So for 80% of the last year, I've been eating gluten-free as well. And people have always asked us on the podcast to do a gluten-free episode. So that's why we're here. And Rebecca, how long have you been eating gluten-free?
I was tested in May of 2009 and found to have a gluten sensitivity. So since May of 2009, so close to 16 years. Yep.
Cool. Okay, so let's just swap to a break and then we'll come back and dive into your story a bit more.
Okay.
If you've been around ancestral food for very long or listened to the podcast for just a few episodes, you know liver is a superfood, and Allison and I both love it. You're looking at a food packed with vitamins A, K, a broad spectrum of B vitamins, CoQ10, bioavailable iron, plus many essential minerals. Liver is your first stop when seeking to gain energy and restore your health. Not only is it a delicacy and staple of traditional diets, it's the first thing most animal predators go for when they're hunting. Are you looking for a good way to work liver into your daily life, but getting it on the table just isn't happening yet or as much as you'd like? Or maybe, like I went through earlier this year, you're pregnant and you're pretty sick and not much food is staying down. This is where liver capsules come in. Allison and I are both supplementing our ancestral diets with liver capsules from One Earth Health. We get all the incredible benefits of liver, even when we're on the road, or preparing non-liver meals for our family, or we just can't get a hold of a liver, and the sourcing and preparation has all been handled for us. One Earth Health produces nutritious organ capsules from 100% grass-fed, New Zealand-raised cattle. Support the pod by purchasing through our link. You'll get 15% off your first order and 5% off subsequent orders. Go to ancestralkitchenpodcast.com/liver or check the show notes.
Okay. So, can you explain, you said you had a test done. Can you explain a little bit more about how that came about and then why you chose after that to go gluten-free?
Yeah, I was seeing an MD at the time who was also very holistic and very interested, learning on her own about how food can be healing. And so we did some blood tests, and it was discovered that I had Hashimoto's thyroiditis.
Okay.
And she wanted to, before I looked at Synthroid or anything like that, she wanted to see if maybe eliminating gluten would help. And she had seen some good results with some of her other patients. And I also got a test. The test was done as well, just to kind of confirm it. I wasn't over the top. I didn't have celiac or anything like that.
Okay.
But it did show that I had some of the antibodies that show up when you have a gluten sensitivity. So we decided to just experiment with it a little bit. And so at that point, I was getting blood tests every 3 months for my thyroid just to see what it was doing. And there was significant improvement after I eliminated gluten. And she wanted me to try and take it a step further. So I ended up going grain-free for a while. And that got me all the way to where she wanted me to be. And I'm not currently grain-free. I have some grains, as I said, I had oats with my breakfast. But I don't eat a whole lot of grains. And my thyroid is still performing very well. So it made a huge difference in that area.
Hashimoto's is an autoimmune disease, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. And do you know why that developed? Is that kind of a genetic thing? Do you know anything else about that?
I'm not really sure. It could have been genetic. I honestly don't know if it runs in my family. I know that they've had other problems, other types of autoimmune issues. But I think, just our day and age, I grew up eating, standard American diet. It was just my dad and me. I ate a lot of microwave meals and canned things and really not smart things. And that was until I was into my late 20s.
Okay.
And so I certainly don't think that was doing me any favors eating that way.
No, I can understand. So how did it go from just you kind of making that decision to the whole family? Did all of you go gluten-free at the same time? How did your husband feel, and what happened with the kids?
Well, at the time it was just my husband and I. We didn't have any kids yet.
Okay.
He also got a test and had sensitivity, or showed that he had sensitivity as well, although his was even less than mine. But we just decided, to make things easier, that we would just go gluten-free. I mean, I do the majority of the cooking in our home. And so to have, separate meals or separate sides. And at the time, I didn't know anything about ancestral eating or anything like that. And so my first reaction was just, look for all the gluten-free labeled stuff in the grocery store. And then to have to buy separate versions of that for everything seemed kind of silly, and to cook it. So we just made everything the same. And he is still gluten-free mostly, but I mean, sometimes he isn't. So yeah.
So have your kids always been gluten-free then since the beginning?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And what happens when they go out, or when you go out, or when they go out on their own, and they're at parties or something like that? What happens there?
Usually, the people who, if we go to someone's house for a party or anything like that, they are very kind and accommodate that.
Okay.
That we're gluten-free. A lot of our friends are actually already gluten-free, which makes it easier for us. Or we just avoid things, or we bring our own things.
Yeah, yeah. How old are your children now?
My oldest is 14, and my youngest just turned 11.
And so they know that they're gluten-free, and do they know why?
Well, we've talked about it with them, just how we are, gluten-free at home, and why their dad and I are gluten-free. We've never had them tested, so I don't necessarily know if they need to be gluten-free. But again, just because of the fact that we show that sensitivity, we're just being more safe than sorry. And then just focusing on grains because I mean, what we've learned is that the sacrifice of gluten really once you've been doing it this long, or if they, like, as they've been doing their whole life, it's not really a huge sacrifice. We just find alternatives that work for us.
Yeah, cool. What's the most challenging thing, do you think, in the time that you've been doing this about eating gluten-free?
Sometimes I have a craving for something. Just I've had, and I know you're going to talk about this, but I have had bad luck making gluten-free bread for myself that fulfills that craving.
Yeah.
And so, but it doesn't happen very often. And then, of course, if we do, we are eating out. We don't eat out a whole lot, but when we're traveling or, just away from home, sometimes trying to find gluten-free options is challenging.
Yeah. The bread thing is really interesting because, when you're in the middle of that craving, it feels like the worst thing in the world and you just want that bread, but it passes.
Yeah.
And then, you might go, or in my experience, when I was not eating gluten bread at all, if you get used to it, you can go for a long time without even be bothered.
Right.
And then it comes and gets you again.
Yeah.
But it passes again. So I can understand the thing about bread. And like you said, we will talk about that a bit later in the episode. So I just want to talk about your meal planning a bit more. I mentioned that you were in the early episode, 83, but your meal planning, to me, seems absolutely incredible. Can you explain how that in particular applies and helps you with the gluten-free?
Well, just being able to, I think it probably shows up more in like our sides. So a lot of times, gluten or wheat or, grains show up in sides in a meal. So like rolls or, noodles, pasta, that sort of thing. And so again, just because I've been doing this for so long, I know, like, if I am using a recipe that calls for like rice, which we do have rice sometimes, but not always, or pasta or something like that, I know that I can substitute something else for that. And so that can show up in the meal plan with that meal, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And seriously, if people want to know about Rebecca's meal planning, do go back to 83. She uses an app, which Andrea is now completely hooked on and loves. She's always talking about it on Discord. So do go back and listen to that and understand just how thorough and just amazing how you can you plug all that stuff into there and then you know what you're buying and you know what you're doing, and it's just out of that part of your brain that's having to hold things, which I think is wonderful.
Yes, automation is wonderful.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to another quick ad and then we will come back and talk about the meals that you eat.
Okay.
Hey, you washing the dishes. Been there. You've heard Allison and I talk over and over about her love of rye sourdough bread. Well, I might actually call it an obsession, but that's neither here nor there. Now you can make Allison's rye sourdough in your own kitchen with her as your teacher. And she's a really good teacher. Rye is economical, it's delicious, and full of nutrients and low in gluten. There's a reason why it has been a darling of bread bakers for centuries. Make it into sourdough, as Allison will show you in her course, Rye Sourdough Bread, Mastering the Basics. And you've got an amazing, tasty, and nutritious staple in your kitchen. It's traditional and it's nutritional. In this course, you'll learn everything there is to know about how she creates and maintains her rye sourdough starter, all about whole grain sourdough rye, including the key differences between baking with rye and wheat, how to make 2 loaves, an everyday rye sandwich bread, and a delicious Russian-style dark rye loaf, and what to do with your sourdough discard, including video walkthroughs for sourdough pancakes and a tasty, sweet, spiced cake. Head to www.ancestralkitchen.com/rye.
Okay, so we'll go through breakfast, lunch and evening meal. Can you talk about some examples to start with of what you eat for breakfast?
We usually eat pretty much the same thing every day during the week. We'll have some kind of oat thing usually. Sometimes I make soaked oat and buckwheat muffins, and I'll make a batch of those and then freeze the ones that we don't eat that morning. Mm-hmm. And those are soaked overnight in kefir. Sometimes I'll just make oatmeal. I think I told you once that oats are my love language. So
yeah, you
did. They are a big part of breakfast usually. Or we have something like, what we had this morning. Although this is usually rare. We don't normally have leftover pancakes from the weekend. But that's usually what my husband makes. So my husband makes breakfast on the weekends. And sorry, I'll go back. Along with the weekday meal, we have the oat related item. And then we'll usually have scrambled eggs. My daughter will have either an egg yolk or 2 scrambled egg yolks, or I'd make her chicken sausage sometimes. If chicken is available, it's been hard to come by lately. And then we'll have either homemade yogurt or homemade kefir, depending on who's consuming it. 'Cause not everyone is a fan of kefir, unfortunately.
Okay.
And then on the weekends, when my husband makes breakfast, he either makes the pancakes that I mentioned, or we have another oat apple. I think I shared that in the other episode.
You
but
did.
That again is...
Yeah. There's a download, I'll jump in, for that episode 83 for Patreons, which has that baked apple dish that you're talking about in it. Yeah, for sure. Carry on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we'll have that, and that's, again, oats soaked in water and a little bit of either yogurt or kefir with apples. Or we have another one that we've been trying lately. It's also oats with blueberries. It's like a oat blueberry coffee cake. Then we'll have bacon and eggs, and it's really good. So I mean, it's all similar. Usually eggs are our main protein.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And
simple.
Do you cook it fresh every day?
Yes. Yeah. I'll make a dozen. And then, we'll have 3 that morning or however many of us happen to be eating. Sometimes my husband fasts. And then I'll freeze the rest. And then we just reheat them in the toaster oven on the following mornings.
Okay. And do you do that with the bakes? Do you make the bakes double the size and have leftovers, or are you making those fresh each time?
Usually those are fresh each time, except for the pancakes. He'll make a double batch of pancakes on Saturday, and then we'll store half of it in the fridge and then just reheat it on Sunday morning.
Okay, nice. Okay, so let's move on to lunch. Give me some examples of what you're eating gluten-free for lunch.
Usually not usually. Sometimes it's leftovers if we have leftovers from the night before. We'll have sometimes like tuna. Let's see. There's there's gluten-free, almond flour tortillas that you can either make or buy, and we'll use those as in place of regular tortillas, and have some cheese melted in them or some ham. Usually I'll buy a big slab of ham and then slice it and freeze the slices, and then I can thaw them as I need them. Sometimes I make a butternut squash soup, which is very simple in the Instant Pot. Let's see. It's usually sort of sometimes we get summer sausage, and we'll make sort of like a charcuterie board. We'll have sliced summer sausage with some sliced raw cheese. And then every once in a while we'll splurge on seed crackers, organic seed crackers, and have those. Usually, we'll have a ferment of some kind, sauerkraut or curtido or, pickles or whatever I happen to have in the refrigerator, salsa. So it's not really, I don't have like a rotation for it or anything like that. It's sort of what's available, and then what can I make from what's available.
Okay. And then what about your evening meal?
The evening meal is usually some kind of protein. So for the most part, that's either beef, chicken, or fish, and sometimes pork. Every once in a while, we'll have soaked beans or eggs. I guess we have a lot of different proteins now that I'm stating everything. And then we'll have that with a vegetable side. So for instance, let's see. Well, last night we had a soup. So I made a bean soup. It was a cannellini bean soup with soaked beans in homemade chicken stock with tomatoes and kale and just some spices. So it was very simple. And then we had salad with that, and then some crackers and milk. Very simple.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think the key for me is just keeping it simple and finding things that work for us and repeating those things.
Yeah. And that's where the meal planning comes in, just repeating. Your children are at home because you're homeschooling. Are they being involved in some of those meals, any of those meals, all of them, in cooking?
Yeah, we have it on our schedule that my son helps me make supper on Mondays, and then my daughter helps me make supper on Thursdays. So just whatever we happen to be making that day, they'll be helping me in the kitchen, chop and stir and things like that.
Great. So if people want to see your meal plans, you put them out in your newsletter, which people can sign up to via humbleplace.com. And every time you send a newsletter, you've got that meal plan in there. They're all up on your website in really quite a lot of detail. So you can click on them and see where you've got the recipe from and actually go and find the actual recipe. So that's a really helpful resource that if people are interested, they should go and find out. Okay, let's talk now about the kind of specific gluten-free carb options. So first of all, not even thinking about grains or pseudo-grains, we've got root vegetables. So from the root vegetables category, I'm thinking potatoes, sweet potatoes, which you call yams. Listeners will be interested to know that Rebecca went and got a yam for her, which I call a sweet potato, and held it up on the camera for me. Because
we needed to clarify because it is confusing.
Has it got yellow flesh? Has it got white flesh? What is it? Anyway, a sweet potato or a yam, squash, which you talked about your soup, parsnip, swede, which is rutabaga over in the States, beetroot, beet, and celeriac. How often are you using root vegetables in your meal plan rotation? Do you eat them every day, or is it just seasonal? How does that work for you?
Very often. Usually I've found that to be a good replacement sometimes for grains. So for instance, sometimes I make a beef stroganoff that is supposed to be served over like noodles or rice or something, and I'll just serve it over mashed potatoes.
Okay.
And that works well for us. And then, of course, for the other things, it just depends on, like, if we're in a CSA, what we get from our farmer. So, usually it's very simple, just roasting those things and things. So we have a wide variety. Potatoes are pretty much a staple in our house. We have those pretty much year round. Also yams. But the other things are more seasonal.
Yeah. The other recipe that's in that download that patrons can get is a tray bake with, I think, sausage and potato in, which is an example of you using potato. This end, we do roasted vegetables during the kind of autumn and winter when they're around. We will do them, just like you said, really simply in the oven, just with maybe some lard and some spices, or perhaps with olive oil and some herbs, and just literally put them in the oven and cook them. And then we're eating them fresh that day when they've just been cooked. But we also eat them afterwards. So we put them in the fridge, and then we'll either have them cold the day after, or sometimes I just reheat them in the cast iron pan with some lard, and we'll eat those for 2 or 3 days. Okay, so let's move on now and talk about grains and pseudo grains that we might be able to use if we're eating gluten-free. So the first one that I always put first, because I love it, and it sounds like you do as well.
I do.
The first ones are oats. And, most people think that oats are just porridge, or oat milk now as well, obviously. But they're so versatile. I mean, you're using them in your kitchen for pancakes, which you're just doing in the blender. And you're using them for bakes, which are so versatile because you can make them savoury or sweet. I've got recipes on my blog for oat cakes, for sourdough oat cakes, for oat bakes, for fermented porridge, for lots and lots of different oat dishes, which I will put in the show notes. So if people want to access those, they can. Let's talk a bit about rice, because you said you don't use it very much. Tell us what your choices are on rice, what you have and why you don't have it so much.
We have white basmati rice. That's the rice of choice for us.
Mm-hmm.
We don't eat a lot of it just because we've gotten so used to over the years not eating grains aside from oats.
Yeah.
That it's just not part of our regular rotation. But there are certain dishes, like if I make a curry, or tonight I'm just making salmon and we're going to have rice with that. So I've got it soaking right now. It's just not something that we have a whole lot, but occasionally it's nice. My daughter really likes it.
Why do you choose white, not brown?
I have read that brown rice generally has a higher arsenic content and is more difficult to digest, even if it's soaked. And so we switched to white rice. And when we first started eating Weston A. Price way, we were eating brown rice, and neither one of us really liked it. And when I started doing more research into it, I decided to switch. Yeah,
we're exactly the same. So I used to eat brown rice, and now we don't have brown rice at all. We just have white rice. For the reason that it seems that more traditional communities ate white rather than brown. I didn't know about the arsenic thing, but that's really useful. Do you always soak your rice?
Yes.
You do?
Yeah.
Okay. And you just soak it overnight, and do you put vinegar in there or not?
Sometimes I'll soak it overnight if I remember the night before. Sometimes I'll start it earlier in the morning if I know I can get, a good 6 to 8 hours of soaking time. And I'll just soak it in water with a little bit of apple cider vinegar.
Okay. And then how long does that take you to cook? It must be really quick with the soak.
Yeah, I usually cook it in my Instant Pot, so it's only about 9 minutes.
Wow. Okay. We haven't, I think maybe Rob did rice once in the Instant Pot. We've just got the Instant Pot, not had it long.
Oh, okay.
So we're kind of getting used to it. And Rob absolutely loves it. He's like, wow,
it's so convenient.
He said to me, this is the first piece of kitchen equipment you've ever bought that makes my life easier.
Yes, I guess all the rest probably added more work.
Exactly. I'm just making him do more things with the other ones.
Right, right.
What I find fascinating about rice is it's another one of those grains like wheat that has been super, super hybridized and crossbred to create high yield. And if you go back in time, there are so many varieties of heritage rice that look different, taste different, smell different. And you can really, if you like rice, you can play around with those. So that's quite an exciting thing. It's not you just have to eat white rice for every meal. You can try all these red rices and black rices and wild rices. They're wonderful.
we do wild rice too.
That's yum, isn't it? I really like wild
rice. Yes.
Okay. Millet. Again, millet's something that, it was never hybridized because it's an ancient grain, but there are so many varieties of it. There are millets, there are lots of different millets. And we have a whole episode on millet, which was number 81. I often make polenta with millet, and that drink that I really like, the fermented drink that I developed, Boza, is also millet. So we eat millet a fair bit here. Do you use millet?
I don't. No, I feel like I should. Andrea's been trying to convince me that I should. There's a person in my family that is not a fan of millet, so I may work on it more though. Yeah,
maybe you should kind of work really hard to put it into something exciting. Like put a salad with lots of different veggies and some miso or something to make it a bit different. Because on its own, particularly. If we cook too much and then we have leftovers, Rob will just eat it cold. But Gabriel's like, oh, not cold millet again.
Yes.
So it can make a difference to just jazz it up a little bit rather than just having it by itself.
How you prepare it, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. The same for sorghum, really. We when we were in Italy, we used sorghum a lot because sorghum's grown in Italy. I haven't found it grown in this country, so we're not using it so much. But that cooks up pretty much like rice does, and you can use that. Have you used sorghum, Rebecca?
I have, yeah. I make some every once in a while. We don't, again, another grain that we don't have a whole lot of is corn. but every once in a while I'll make cornbread muffins, and they have sorghum in them, and they're very good.
And do you buy sorghum flour for that, or do you actually have the whole sorghum?
I do buy the flour. Yeah. I don't know that I've actually even looked into a resource for whole sorghum, but now you've got me thinking about that. Maybe I need to do that.
Yeah, it's a nice one to have as an alternative. You know,
Yeah.
you don't eat many grains anyway, but
Mm-hmm.
it's sweet and it's tasty and it's got
Yeah.
more bite to it because the grains are bigger than millet. So it feels a bit
Okay.
more satisfying, you know, when you're eating it.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got teff, which isn't a grain, it's a pseudo grain, but
Right.
in those famous kind of African pancakes, teff pancakes, which
Mm-hmm.
we do have a video of Chef Aaron Goldstein doing wonderfully concentric circles in his cast iron pan with teff. Teff, amaranth. I tend to put teff, amaranth, buckwheat and quinoa sort of in the same category, or maybe just teff, amaranth and quinoa. Do you use quinoa?
I don't. I can't actually handle quinoa, and I'm not sure why. I think there's a digestive issue there, but it gives me a really bad stomach ache if it's not rinsed extremely well, because I think the saponins in it irritate my stomach. So we usually don't have quinoa.
Yeah, so if you soak quinoa, everyone will know if they've tried soaking quinoa, is if you leave it in the water goes so kind of bubbly and soapy and thick. And then when you go to rinse it, it takes like 8 or 10 rinses to get all this stuff off. Those are the saponins. We were off quinoa for ages, and then we tried Gable with it, and he did not do well with it. So at the moment, we don't eat quinoa at all. But we do have buckwheat a lot. Do you use buckwheat there?
I do. Yeah, we use buckwheat in the muffins that I make. Are half oats, half buckwheat. I have a few random recipes that call for buckwheat. There's a chocolate cake recipe, so we'll have that for special occasions. But that's probably the pseudo grain that I have the most experience with.
Yeah. We use it for pancakes. That's my favourite use of buckwheat. And I've done it with either buckwheat flour, which I'm just mixing overnight with something like a kefir in it or some sourdough starter and water, and then frying up in the cast iron pan in the morning. Or sometimes I will make pancakes with whole buckwheat grains. So I'll soak the whole buckwheat grains, and then I leave them really for 2 or 3 days, depending on how I'm organised. Sometimes I'll just forget about them and they're still fine. And then I rinse them really well, because again, they're a little bit soapy when you rinse them. And sometimes I sprout them, which takes another couple of days, but sometimes I just put them straight in the food processor after they've been soaked with some water and blend them up. And then I'll use that mix to make pancakes. You can ferment that, or you can make pancakes with it straight away. Kasha is one of our favourite recipes in the Nourishing Traditions cookbook, which is a buckwheat recipe. Have you tried the kasha?
I haven't, but I've wanted to, because I think you talked about it in one of your episodes about your favorite recipes from Nourishing Traditions.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was inspired to, but I haven't gotten to it yet.
So the only problem is that it's got eggs in. So,
well, the rest of us can have eggs. Yeah. So
there'll be 3 of you eating it and 1 not.
Right.
And then chickpea flour. Have you ever worked with that?
I've never made anything with it. Actually, no, I take that back. Well, it was soaked chickpeas, so I don't know if it's the same thing. Probably not. I made muffins once that called for chickpeas, like ground up chickpeas. So they were soaked overnight. And then we made these muffins, but they didn't turn out very well. They were kind of flat. But I've never worked with dry chickpea flour.
So it sounds similar if you're grinding them. Chickpea flour, I first used it in Italy, because there's a traditional pancake recipe with chickpea flour. But the traditional recipe doesn't have it soaked, and we're not so great with pulses. So I haven't experimented with it more. But if people can digest it well, that's an option. The other option, which I learnt about in Italy, is chestnut flour, which is just wonderful for pancakes. So sweet and wonderful, just mixed in and of itself, just with water and made into pancakes, or mixed, with half another grain, so you could put it with buckwheat. And then the pancakes are really good with ricotta and different things on them. So that's another option. With all these grains, you'll say you're soaking your rice. I'm assuming you're soaking your buckwheat as well when you use it, are you?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And with the oats, you've already explained that you're soaking them all. So ideally, with all of these grains, we would soak them, ideally overnight in warm water with an acidic medium, like you mentioned, apple cider vinegar, or that can be kefir. And that helps reduce the load of the anti-nutrients on them, so that when you come to eat them, you're able to absorb more nutrients. You said you don't eat many grains. Would you eat them once or twice a week, Rebecca? How often?
Well, aside from what we have for breakfast, because that's, almost every day. Occasionally I'll make a coconut flour muffin, but that's not very often. For supper, we'll probably have them maybe once or twice a week.
Okay. And when we talked about the content of this episode, we had a little discussion beforehand. I said to you, well, you're not hungry, not eating those grains all the time. And you sort of talked about how you use vegetables and how you've got used to that being different. Can you speak to that for a little bit?
Well, like I said before, I found ways to sort of substitute the grains, because a lot of times, especially if you're using, commercially made breads and pastas and things like that, it's really just a filler. There's not really a whole lot of nutritional content to it. And so I've started looking at other things that could be, quote unquote fillers that actually had nutrients in them and were nourishing. And so things like root vegetables are a really big part of it, because, it's just a lot of times it's just a different type of carb.
Yeah.
I think things like fat can really help too, just in terms of helping you to feel full.
Yeah.
And then of course protein, so instead of focusing on sort of like a bread or a pasta or rice or something like that as the bulk of the meal or the filling part of the meal, we'll just put a little bit more emphasis on the other things. So like the meat or the fat, or including more than one side that would be more filling.
Yeah, I like that idea that you would maybe have more vegetables than you're used to. The people who might be used to, if they're eating bread, that's obviously the thing that's going to fill you up. But if you're not eating bread, then just bringing more vegetables to your plate is giving you that kind of bulk, that fiber, which will fill you up along with the fat and the protein that you're eating. So that's cool.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to talk about gluten-free bread next, but let's go to a break before we get to that.
Okay.
Do you love oats? Want to try your hand at a traditional Scottish oat fermentation? Suans is just that. It was made in Scotland for centuries and will give you both a creamy, easy to digest porridge and a tangy probiotic drink. My video course, Suans, the Scottish Oat Ferment, over at the Fermentation School, will guide you through everything you need to know to create these two ancestral foods in your own kitchen, no matter what equipment you have. Head to ancestralkitchen.com/Suans, ancestralkitchen.com/Suans, SOWANS, or click the link in the show notes to get a 10% discount automatically applied. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about gluten-free bread, because I feel like this is something that is asked of Andrea and I a lot. Let's talk about first your experience with trying to make gluten-free bread and how it is for you at the moment, whether you do that.
Well, I don't. I'll start at the beginning.
Okay. Good plan.
So as I said, when we first went gluten-free, I was just, going to the store and finding whatever packages had gluten-free things. And at the time there were some things, but not nearly as many as there are now.
Okay.
And so I found a recipe for a gluten-free bread that you could make in a bread maker.
Right.
So I bought a bread maker, and I think it called for 5 different types of flour. It was like masa flour and rice, white rice flour, and I can't even remember what else. Amaranth. So I bought all these different flours and I made this bread, and it was sort of shaped like a whale, and it was very dense and very hard, and it tasted terrible. And I said, I'm not going to do this anymore.
Okay. And what happened to the bread maker? Did it just do that one thing? And
I
then...
eventually sold. Yeah, I think we tried some gluten-free bread mixes, but they weren't any better.
Right.
And so I think I eventually sold it on eBay. Okay. So I did get some money back, not good. From the flour. So
no.
So after that, it was that was when I started to go more grain-free.
Yeah.
And so I was experimenting with like almond flour breads and coconut flour breads and things like that. And that's what we did for a very long time. But of course, it's not completely ideal, because almond flour, if it's not soaked and prepared properly, and at the time I wasn't buying organic almond flour. So there's, now I've learned there's the concern with glyphosate.
Yeah.
And it's also high in phytic acid. So that was, there's always, it felt like there was never really just an ideal substitution for it. And I still occasionally bake with almond flour. We have some brownies that we make that are made from ground up walnuts.
Okay.
Which is really good. And then occasionally I'll make, like I said, the cornbread, when we're having chili.
Yeah.
I did experiment, just because you guys inspired me to, with sourdough. I made some sourdough teff, flatbreads.
Okay.
And the name of them is escaping me right now. I cannot think of the name. It's not. Yes, that's it. Yes. I made that, and that was really good, but I only did it the one time. And I've tried to make, and you and I have talked about this, gluten-free, or I'm sorry, buckwheat sourdough. And despite all of the fermenting I've done over the years, sourdough has been such a challenge for me personally. But I still, I still want to keep trying. And so I'm excited to hear what you're going to say also about gluten-free bread, because it's been kind of hit or miss for me. So yeah.
Okay.
Share your wisdom with us, Alison.
Well, I haven't gone, a lot of the patrons on Discord are absolute aficionados with gluten-free sourdough bread. I wouldn't put myself in that category, because I think I haven't needed to, we've been able to eat gluten for most of the time. So I haven't pushed it that far. But I also think that I'm kind of not that bothered by making it look but make it look like one of those breads that people take photos of,
Right.
If it holds together and it slices all right, I kind of consider that a win. I think that we tend to overcomplicate bread, and it doesn't have to be complicated. So first of all, the injera pancakes that you're talking about, they are a bread. I know they're not a loaf that you slice, but they are bread. So there are lots of flatbreads and pancakes. You can make flatbreads or pancakes out of virtually any grain. So buckwheat is great without any additions. Like I said, you can make a pancake out of it. Some of the gluten grains can be brittle. I think I alluded to kind of millet, sorghum. You can grind those into flour and mix them with water. But if you then try and fry that up, it won't stick together. But if you can eat eggs, you can just pop an egg in there and that will bind everything together. So it's more like a pancake again. And with the egg, it's sort of got more depth to it. But you could put millet and sorghum and teff and anything into an egg kind of mix and it will stick together. Oat cakes are another wonderful thing. Your husband's making those oat pancakes. There are also dry oat cakes, so not pancake style, but more like, well, we would call them biscuit style.
Okay.
I guess you might call them a biscuit as well, like a crunch.
Yeah,
maybe
it
like a
sounds
cracker. Like a cracker, perhaps.
Okay. So more flat.
Thin, yeah. Thin and crunchy. So like an oat cracker. You can make those, literally just with oats that you get from a store, porridge oats. You can whisk them up in a grinder to make them a bit smaller and put fat and water with them. That's one of the recipes that's on my site. Oatcakes like that were eaten in England, Scotland and Wales for centuries. So again, that's not complicated. The other thing that I like to make is a polenta bread, which is just making up a polenta, which I often do with millet flour. and then putting that into a loaf tin, leaving it to cool, patting it down, leaving it to cool, turning it up onto a plate, out onto a plate, and then it's like a loaf, which you can keep in the fridge and cut and eat as it is, or fry. There's a recipe for that in my download, Baking with Ancient Grains, which is available just on my homepage. And that, again, it's not a bread if your definition of bread is based on Instagram.
Right.
But it is a bread. It's a kind of a nice thing you can put on the side of your dinner. I think most of the gluten-free breads that I've made have been denser than wheat breads. I know you can make them not dense. You can go and add all these additives in and other things and play around, and you can make them be light and airy. I've not gone that far. I have a millet and sorghum sourdough bread, which is on my site, which is just, it's simple. It's millet, sorghum, sourdough, salt, water, and it cooks up nicely. You can slice it, but it's not light and airy. And it's interesting because, quite a few people have made it, and some people have come back and said, oh, well, it's already dense. And I do say in the recipe that it won't look like, and they're like, I want it to look like this thing with a big, rise and etc.
Right.
Whereas other people have come to me and said, this bread is amazing. It's lectin-free, it's gluten-free, and it costs about 1/10 of what I pay in the shop to buy a lectin and gluten-free bread. And I'm just making it at home, and I know what's in it, So it's sort of expectations. If you want to go down the path of making it look perfect, you can, but I haven't gone that far.
It'll take more time.
Yeah, exactly. It takes more time.
And probably ingredients.
And more ingredients, and it's a big learning curve. If you do want to make it more mainstream, I think, you have to remember, well, what's in a bread? What do I need in a gluten-free bread to make it look as much as possible like a normal bread? And you need your flour, then you need a binder to make it stick together, and you need some starch to make the crumb nicer. So if you're looking at those three things, to start with the flour, you can balance the flours. So some flours are heavy, buckwheat flour is quite heavy, but you can then mix that up and mix it with a lighter flour like millet to get somewhere in the middle, the balance of those flours.
Okay.
The binder, the easiest one to use is eggs, and particularly from an ancestral point of view, that's the best one to use if you can tolerate them, because that will just make your bread stick together. But some people use psyllium husk, some people use linseed, and then there's guar gum and xanthan gum, which are in a lot of the kind of posh gluten-free bread recipes that you'll see on people's sites. The starch side of it, that lightens the bread and, like I said, makes a nice crumb. You can use potato starch, you can use tapioca, some people use cornstarch, and that's just the kind of simple end of it. I think if you go into a supermarket and you pick up a gluten-free loaf and you look at the ingredients on that bread, you must have done that, Rebecca, yeah?
Oh, yes, definitely. Yeah, especially in the beginning. Yeah. There's a lot in there.
It's terrifying, isn't it?
Right. It's a lot of stuff.
You're like, what's this? Why do I need that? Why do I need that? You don't need that. That's what I'm trying to say. Even when you're making a posh loaf, a loaf that you want to look really nice. I know, because I've seen loaves that supporters of the podcast have made, and they're not using all those, 50 things that are on the list of a packaged loaf that you would get in a store. But like you said, it does need some time educating yourself and trying these things out.
Yeah.
You mentioned grain crackers earlier on. And how do you make those?
Well, there's a couple. Usually those are almond flour.
Almond flour. Okay.
Yeah. So you just, mix up the batter, and then you can roll it out flat and cut them into individual squares, and that works well. So sometimes we'll splurge and we'll get seed crackers from the store that have very simple ingredients. And those are, every once in a while, a convenience food that's nice.
Yeah. There is a flaxseed, linseed bread recipe, which is in Ben Greenfield's book, that I saw but it's written by Dr. Sarah Myhill, who people may have heard of. And that one is literally just, I think it's linseed, salt and water. It's really, really simple. I remember making linseed crackers when Rob and I ate raw food, and we used to put them in the dehydrator. So I know those can come out quite nicely. So if you want a bread that's grain-free, linseed is something you can turn to. And then coconut flour, which you talked about using before.
Yeah.
I remember when we were doing gaps, there being coconut flour. I think there's some coconut flour pancakes in Hilary Boynton's book.
Yes. Yep.
And so coconut flour is something you can turn to. And then, like you just said, you've made crackers with is it just almond flour and water with a bit of salt?
It's been so long, I honestly don't remember. There may have been some kind of binder in it, but I don't remember.
Okay. I remember a long time ago, Rob made some Christmas, we call them mince pies. I don't think you have them in the States. It's like a little sort of tart thing with mixed kind of peels and raisins and sultanas all in.
No, we don't. I've heard of them, but I don't think they're common here.
They're very good. I think I might be bringing them in on a Christmas episode to try and get the States.
Good.
People
Good.
In the States
You'll make it a new thing here.
Exactly. Rob made some of those with almond flour pastry. He's made me almond flour pastry before. And a long time ago, I made some Cornish pasties with almond flour pastry as well. So that's, again, something you can experiment with if you want to have a bread, but you don't even want to use any grains at all. Okay, do you think that you'll experiment with more gluten-free breads, or are you just happy with what you've got there and the routine that you've got, Rebecca?
I do still hope to. I mean, so it can get expensive to experiment. But I want to keep trying, because I really do miss the texture of just, straight up bread, grain-free things with almond flour or coconut flour, which coconut flour has actually become less of an option for us because it usually requires a lot of eggs. So my daughter can't have it.
Yeah.
But almond flour, I mean, they're good. They're good in their own way. And I think that, that's probably the key to eating gluten-free, is that it's not going to be the same. But it can be good in its own way.
Yeah.
And so I'm happy with what we have, but just from the perspective of learning more about food and how it's been traditionally made and offering us more options, I definitely would like to experiment more with sourdough.
Oh, let me know how you get on. I'd love to know.
Okay, I will.
Okay. Is there anything else that I haven't asked about that you think would be of benefit to people listening?
I think if you're first going gluten-free, it can seem a little overwhelming and intimidating, especially if you're used to having, a lot of gluten. But it doesn't have to be complicated. And I think that if you don't make it complicated, like I did, getting a bread maker and 5 different kinds of flour and making a whale loaf and all this stuff in the beginning, if you don't do it from that angle, like you're trying to find a replacement for gluten, in terms of like, I need to have a bread that is just like a sandwich bread that is just like the bread that I'm used to. If you just think of it as this is just a different way of eating, it's sort of like, switching from a standard American diet or standard British diet to eating more ancestrally. It's a different way of eating. It's just a different way of thinking about food. And when you approach it from the perspective that what you're consuming is healing you, and you don't necessarily have to replace identically the things that you were eating before, it does make it more simple. And you will get used to it. I don't even really think about it anymore, honestly, just because we're so used to eating this way at home. It doesn't feel like a sacrifice or an inconvenience anymore at this point.
Wonderful. Thank you. Do you have, if people are wanting to kind of experiment or want to take the step and go gluten-free, where would you point them? Do you have some books that are always down, in your kitchen, or resources you think would be good for them?
I really like the recipes, most of the recipes from nourishingmeals.com, and all of hers, I believe, are gluten-free. I don't have any specific gluten-free websites that I go to because, again, a lot of them are going to just be using a lot of replacement flours.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which, are not ideal. And so generally what I do is I look for websites with recipes or books with recipes that I know will like. And then if it calls for some sort of gluten-y substance in it, I will just think, okay, what could we have instead of that? So like mashed potatoes, or instead of pasta, we just have brown rice pasta. That's the one time we'll have brown rice, and that's occasionally. Just keep it very, very simple. So yeah, I can't say that I have any specific gluten-free options, just because of the fact that they will just include lots of fillers.
I think, a lot of our listeners are used to that, because they'll find normal recipes and they'll be like, oh, I don't want to put that sugar in, I don't want to put this in.
Exactly.
And so they're used to making them ancestralizing them anyway.
Right.
So to turn that attention to gluten, okay, so how can I just switch this up a bit and make it gluten? It's a kind of a similar thing to do.
Yeah. Yep, exactly that.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for your time, Rebecca, for sharing.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Really, really useful. So your website is ahumbleplace.com. You've got your meal plans on there. You also have a wonderful resource for teaching cooking with nourishing traditions to kids on there, which people can find. And I will put all the links to those and all the other recipes that we've talked about in the show notes. Wonderful.
All right. Sounds good.
We'll hopefully we'll have you back next year, Rebecca, to talk about something else.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I'd love to.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
If you'd like to support the podcast, you can join as a patron. Choose from various levels starting at $5. You can see what we offer at ancestralkitchenpodcast.com.
While you're there, check out our favourite books, supplements and kitchenware, or give a one-time donation.
Leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts.
And if you know someone who would love our show, tell them about us.
You are helping to bring ancestral food wisdom into modern kitchens, changing the world one plate at a time.